August 2nd, 10:30 p.m., Pelosi's plane enters Taiwan airspace. The whole world watched on the edge of their seats to see if this was the start of World War III. Chinese officials warned the world that Pelosi landing in Taiwan would force the Chinese army to launch an attack. In fact, the official Chinese army account posted this just a few days earlier: "Prepare for war." And it got millions of likes, while a Chinese state media official literally tweeted about attacking a sitting member of the US Congress. But as the plane slowly descended into Taiwan, what the CCP did next shocked the whole world. It was nothing. Literally nothing. All the threats were just loud barks with no bite. This set off a series of reactions that could spell the downfall of the CCP. Chinese citizens are now questioning if the current leaders are brave enough to defend China's sovereignty. Outrage got so bad that the CCP had to block off Chinese social media sites so news didn't spread. State media outlets had to turn off comments on their website so people couldn't share their thoughts on the news. Popular memes like this one started going viral on social media, basically making fun of the CCP's incompetence. But this is not anything new. In fact, the CCP has done this countless times over the last 40 years. And today, in this video, I want to expose the reason behind why the CCP always says it will invade, but in reality, it never will. Why are Chinese citizens questioning the CCP's ability to defend China, and why there's only one situation out of all the possibilities where the CCP will actually launch an attack.
The Chinese military said it successfully completed its military drills near Taiwan.
Beijing has called off the drills.
But it's not leaving the island alone.
It will, quote, not renounce the use of force against Taiwan.
Taiwan's defense ministry says it detected 21 Chinese
warplanes flooding the skies.
The largest ever Chinese military exercises around Taiwan.
Beijing won't rule out the use of force to take Taiwan.
This show of force was made for TV, shooting rockets towards the Taiwan Strait, even over the island for the first time.
But for us to truly understand the CCP's current relationship with Taiwan, we first have to look back to understand why China still considers Taiwan to be a part of China. Now, the history of China and Taiwan is long, just like any other history, so I'm gonna speed through this a little bit. In the 1800s, Taiwan was part of the Qing Empire, which basically ruled over all of current China. But in 1895, Japanese forces took over Taiwan, defeating the Qing government in the First Sino-Japanese War. And this is where we shift the focus to mainland China and skip forward a little bit. In 1912, the Republic of China, or the ROC, overthrew the Qing Empire and took control of mainland China. Remember this name, the ROC, as this is important to this very day. Around the end of World War II, the ROC meets with the USA and the UK and mentions to them, hey, Japan is controlling Taiwan, but it's kind of part of China. So while you guys are negotiating Japan's surrender, if you can throw in the return of Taiwan to the ROC, we would really appreciate that. So the ROC, the then current government of China, had complete control over mainland China and Taiwan. But when the ROC is distracted by all of this, a full-scale civil war is started by the Communist Army, whose leader is this guy, Mao Zedong. After winning, he set up the People's Republic of China, or PROC, which eventually became the CCP. Now, the old government, the ROC, flees mainland China and moves to Taiwan. I know, it's a lot of acronyms, but I promise this will help make sense of current tensions. Also, a quick side note, support on my last few videos has just been insane. We somehow crossed 300,000 subscribers, which is just unbelievable. So I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's subscribed, everyone who's left a nice comment or dropped a like on the video. And if you haven't already, please drop a like on this video too. It helps me out with the YouTube gods who are going to decide if this video is appropriate or not. Alright, back to my Spark notes on Chinese history. Now, Mao wasn't too happy with the old government taking a piece of China from him, so he decided to invade Taiwan. But lost. This was not the end, though, as Mao already started planning for a second invasion of Taiwan. This is when the US stepped in to protect a non-communist government from losing to communism. Congress passed legislation promising US support if Taiwan is invaded. The US said to Mao that if he didn't leave Taiwan alone, we would nuke China. This is when China realized that if they wanted to be a superpower, they needed their own nuclear weapons. Good old mutually assured destruction. Even the threat of nukes didn't stop invasions for too long, but Mao was never successful and then he died in 1976. Since then, there hasn't been any invasion, but a lot of talk and threats about a potential invasion. So, I just want to make this as clear as possible. China has tried to conquer Taiwan and has failed miserably multiple times. Xi Jinping knows this, and conquering Taiwan is not going to be an easy feat. I realize that current China is many times more powerful than China was in the 1900s, but that doesn't mean an invasion will be an easy task. Alright, I'm getting ahead of myself now. We'll discuss this in just a minute, but let's get back to the story. After Mao's death, the relationship between China and Taiwan started improving a little. Taiwan relaxed rules on visits to China, and in 1991, the ROC, or Republic of China, remember this is the official name for Taiwan, proclaimed that war with the CCP was over. China proposed the so-called one country, two systems option, which it said would allow Taiwan significant autonomy if it agrees to come under Beijing's control. This system underpinned Hong Kong's return to China in 1997, and the manner in which it was governed until recently, when Beijing finally sought to increase its influence.
Hong Kong was a British colony, but in 1997, Britain gave it back to China. But there were conditions that it had to protect Hong Kong's autonomy, its independent courts, and its freedom of expression for at least 50 years.
Yeah, so that didn't go as planned in Hong Kong. And Taiwan, yeah, they saw this coming and they rejected the offer back then. Now this is when the CCP's headache, it just starts throbbing. In 1994, Taiwan held its first ever democratic election to elect its leaders. To oppose democracy and Taiwanese people having the right to vote, China gathered up a bunch of troops and military equipment on the shore nearest to Taiwan and started a show of force. This is when Washington shows up to protect Taiwan, as promised by US law. The US Navy brings out all of its biggest and most advanced ships, missiles, and jets. This was just to send the message that war with Taiwan meant a war with the world's most powerful military. China was forced to ease up, and tensions calmed back down. Now, as if democracy in a Chinese-claimed region wasn't bad enough, in 2000, the new president openly backed independence from China. Many of you might be wondering, if Taiwan has its own government, why wouldn't it be considered independent right now? Well, for the longest time, the CCP and the ROC agreed on one thing. There's only one China, meaning Taiwan is a part of China. But both disagree on who is the legitimate government for this one China. The CCP calls the ROC illegitimate, and vice versa. Initially, all the countries recognized the ROC as the official government in China, but slowly most have switched to the CCP, including the United Nations, who has given the China seat to the CCP. As all the fighting and disagreement were going on, Taiwan started to find its own identity. Citizens in Taiwan now consider themselves Taiwanese and not Chinese, and the ROC actually has no problem leaving mainland China to the CCP. It just doesn't want the CCP in Taiwan. But currently, only a little over a dozen countries recognize Taiwan as a country, and contrary to popular belief, the United States is not one of them. Washington has followed a policy of strategic ambiguity. Here's what that means.
Now, another part of this is ambiguity. Say it with me. Ambiguity. Very good. See, you don't want people to know exactly what you mean.
The US didn't want to lock heads with the CCP over Taiwan, so it sticks with the One China policy and considers the CCP the official government. But it has also pledged to supply Taiwan with defensive weapons and stressed that any attack by China would cause grave concern. Recently, though, this position has been changing, but we'll get to that in just a second. So Taiwan's autonomy is in a complicated position. But in 2000, it was the first time a Taiwanese president has openly supported independence. This scared the CCP, and they made a new law, the Anti-Secession Law, stating China's right to use non-peaceful means against Taiwan if it tried to secede from China, as if they hadn't tried military action before. Because of their open support for independence, the DPP party has been nicknamed the Pro-Independence Party. And when they are in power in Taiwan, China becomes more and more aggressive with their threats towards Taiwan. Then, in 2013, this man came into power.
China's once-in-a-decade transition of power was completed earlier today.
Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping has just been elected president of China
as China's head of state
and chairman of the PRC Central Military Commission.
And his nation is on the rise.
In a near unanimous vote, with 99.86% of the vote.
Won by 2,952 votes to 1.
His goal is to become the greatest leader in China's history, and he wants to achieve that by doing something that has never been done before, the great reunification of the Chinese nation. He wants to bring Taiwan back under China peacefully, but while showing off tanks and the military. It's pretty similar to when you're getting mugged and the guy flashes his gun but says, "Listen, I don't want any problems, just give me your wallet." So whenever there are talks about Taiwanese independence, it gives China a perfect excuse to flex their muscles. Now, here's where the problems start. Even though the president openly backed independence in 2000, that's not really the case anymore. Nor do Taiwanese citizens want independence. Most recent surveys show that only 5% of Taiwanese people want to be independent. The vast majority, around 82%, just want the status quo to continue. That strategic ambiguity. They just want peace and freedom. So why is the CCP being so aggressive about its stance against Taiwanese independence if Taiwan isn't even pushing for independence? You see, Xi realizes something that many on the outside don't. Though the cost of war with Taiwan, and consequentially the USA, is far too great for China to bear, the benefit of playing the victim in this case is just too enticing. Nancy Pelosi's visit doesn't really change anything about Taiwanese independence, but if China can claim that the USA is getting involved in China's internal affairs, it can create an enemy for Chinese citizens to focus on. And the CCP badly needs a distraction away from its internal problems.
A massive protest over frozen bank deposits.
Hundreds gathered in Zhengzhou. Tens of thousands of them have begun withholding payments.
In a notice circulating on social media, the suppliers have demanded payment from Evergrande.
Evergrande. As Evergrande's debt crisis deepens, small business owners and people waiting for homes to be completed are starting to despair.
As China clings to what it calls a dynamic zero-COVID strategy.
As discussed in my previous videos, domestically, China is struggling. Its real estate bubble is popping, which accounts for 30% of their GDP and 75% of households' wealth. The CCP's zero-COVID policy is killing whatever economic growth the country had going this year. And to put the nail in the coffin, the Henan banking protests are destroying the public's trust in the banking systems and the government's ability to protect its citizens. Now, in any time frame, all of this is not a good thing for any leader. But this situation is even more embarrassing when you consider that President Xi plans to give himself an unprecedented third term at the 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party later this year. Things are not looking good for a president who wants to reaffirm to the public that he is the right person to lead the country. Last quarter, China's GDP only grew by 0.1%, which caused the yearly GDP growth to go down to 4.5%. This is the first time in the last 30 years that the CCP has missed its GDP growth goal, which was set at 5.5%. This economic slowdown in China has had a ripple effect all over the globe. So what does this mean for your wallet? Economists worry about the first derivative, but markets trade the second. This year's markets have gone haywire, with CPI, PPI, and wage data painting a complex picture, and $13 trillion going up in flames. Even worse, record high inflation means your cash will lose half its value by 2030. But one asset thrives during times like these, with low correlation to stocks, inflation hedging qualities, and exceptional resilience: contemporary art. Morgan Stanley says it often experiences less volatility than stocks, and the last time inflation was this high, it increased more in value than gold, real estate, and the S&P 500. That's why today's sponsor, Masterworks, is flooded with demand as people are looking to diversify. They've become the biggest buyer in the art market, offering shares in contemporary art by the greats, from Banksy to Picasso. And to date, they've sold 5 paintings with an average net return of 26.8% to investors. Demand is so high that there's a wait list, but you can skip it by clicking the link in the description. Because of all of this, Xi is losing support. But that's not to say that he won't be given a third term. He is still extremely powerful, but slowly the public's trust in him is waning. To squash any dissent, Xi has used anti-corruption probes against anyone who opposed his rule within the party. Leaders will be arrested and charged, all to weed out people deemed disloyal to Xi. Another purpose of this anti-corruption probe is to send a message. Much like Putin's relation with oligarchs, Xi wants to reaffirm to China's elites that money and power doesn't mean much if you're not loyal to the party. And Xi can get party officials in line by using made-up corruption charges, but that's hard to do with the public, especially in a nation of more than 1 billion people. This is why the CCP turns to stoking nationalism. Creating an enemy overseas is a common tactic many nations use to garner support domestically. Even the CCP has been doing this for decades now. Citizens of China have always been told that Taiwan is a part of China. Chinese citizens don't call Taiwan a renegade province. They consider it a province, just like any other. So it's easy to call an event like Pelosi's visit an external national security issue and use it to distract citizens away from internal ones. China's GDP per capita is 6 times smaller than that of the USA. It's closer to countries like Mexico, Thailand, and Brazil. But it spends the second most amount of money on its military, only behind the USA. It's much easier for the government to justify spending so much on the military when you can convince the public that there's an enemy outside trying to take away Chinese territory. At the moment, Taiwan is much more useful for the CCP as a distraction away from local problems than actually controlling it. Every time there's a problem internally, the CCP can scream about the crisis in Taiwan and distract citizens' attention away from internal problems. But this is where the CCP starts facing another problem. If you scream the same thing over and over again without much action, it's gonna lose its effect. And much worse than that is that your own people will lose trust in you to actually do what you say. The same people the CCP counted on when they stoked nationalism are now the one thing that scares Xi Jinping the most. The lead up to Pelosi's visit was no different. Citizens wanted the government to be strict and stern, with warnings if Pelosi visited, and the government followed through. In fact, the official China Twitter account posted this just a few days earlier: "Prepare for war," and it's got millions of likes. While a Chinese state media official literally tweeted about attacking a sitting member of the US Congress, and this is what the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to say.
佩洛西众议长如果赴台，将是对中国内政的粗暴干涉，严重损害中国主权和领土完整，肆意践踏一个中国原则，严重威胁台海和平稳定，严重破坏中美关系，导致非常严重的事态和后果。
Now, the problem with these threats is that China has misjudged how the American public and the government would react. For what seems like the first time in decades, Pelosi's visit to Taiwan had bipartisan support from both parties and party supporters. The CCP wasn't prepared for this. As her plane landed in Taiwan, Chinese nationalists had lost trust in the government. Outrage got so bad that it's rumored the government had to take down Chinese social media sites so that people couldn't express their anger towards the CCP. Here's just one clip of CCP supporters freaking out over the Pelosi visit. The next day, protests were organized over the CCP's inability to stop Pelosi, and state media had to turn off comments on their websites because people were too dang angry. It's pretty likely that the CCP bot army has also been hard at work on other social media platforms to drown out any news of this hitting the global news cycle. So if you guys can share this video on social media and in your friend groups, it will help out a lot. In retaliation, China has announced military exercises and training activities around Taiwan to show that it can take the island. Maybe this will be enough to calm the nationalists, or maybe not. One thing is for sure, though, the CCP is playing a dangerous game, using nationalism to distract away from domestic problems. A game that has the potential to end the regime. The problem with nationalism is that if you don't show enough toughness, it'll backfire. People will start to question if the current leaders are the right people to lead the country. And if the CCP is ever backed into a corner where the only hope for survival is attacking Taiwan, I think we all know what'll happen. Now, this is all rational thinking, but rationality goes out the window when you consider that most of the decision-making in authoritarian governments rests on one man's shoulders. I believe Xi made a grave mistake putting reunification as the #1 agenda for his rule. The only way for him to save face might be committing to a war that's bound to have no winners.